Balan Wonderworld is a game that prides itself on containing 80 unique costumes, but how many of those do you actually need to beat the game? I am Aero, a speedrunner of this game, and I went through the process of working out how to beat this game using the least amount of costumes possible, and the results shocked me. In this video, I will show off how this was achieved and answer the questions proposed in the video's title. How many costumes does it take to beat Balan Wonderworld? Before I get onto the rules I set for this challenge, I would love it if you take the time to check if you're subscribed to my channel or not, and if you aren't, please consider subscribing. If I hit 300 subscribers, then you can expect more videos like the one you're seeing here. Also check out my Twitch over at twitch.tv/Chiron to see runs like this live. The link will also be in the description. Before this run begins, I will explain a couple rules to this challenge. The first is that this challenge is about the least amount of unique costumes, meaning that I am allowed to pick up duplicates of costumes that I've already picked up, and trust me, I will be needing them. The second rule is that I am not allowed to go over the amount of costumes that I have set out for myself. I'm not going to say the number right now because I don't want to spoil it, but yeah, any accidental costume pickups will result in a dead run essentially. The third rule is that any costume that I have equipped will go towards the costume counter, meaning that even if that costume that I have equipped doesn't go towards the wardrobe counter, which shows how many costumes you have, then that will still count regardless. And the final rule is that because I'm not a weenie, co-op is not allowed, even though I don't think that would actually change the final answer to this challenge. But yeah, with the rules out the way, let's get started with this challenge. And like every Balan Wonderworld run, we will be starting with World 1. So right off the bat, we would need Tornado Wolf to break this brittle block so that we can get through the first gate and to access a trophy later into the level. However, the first brittle block can be skipped doing a rather precise jump around it onto the platform with the switch. This was a skip that used to be done in the demo, but was made a lot more difficult after UG gutted our precious jump height. Jumping Jack can be easily skipped by jumping off this pumpkin and onto the switch platform, but by not picking up the Jumping Jack, we are becoming severely limited to what platforming we can actually do, and this usually results in a limited amount of Balan statues that we are able to collect, meaning that I am actually forced to do the Balan bout in this level. Kill me now. And with the Balan bout out of the way, we have finished 1-1 with 0 costumes collected and 5 Balan statues. So immediately upon going into 1-2, we may realise that we're going to hit a wall here, and that wall is that if we don't have a costume equipped, we can't actually damage enemies. Luckily for us, most of the enemies in this game are just suggestions, but we do not have a way to deal with the mini-boss or the World 1 boss, so, you know, we can't actually finish this level and we can't beat the boss even if we could skip that mini-boss. Luckily for us, there is a way around this. All we need to do is be able to grab 8 Balan statues and then leave the level, which will then unlock World 2 and 3. Luckily for us, there is a way that we can actually grab 3 trophies in this level without needing a costume. The first one is where UG wants us to use the elastic plant to grab a statue, but he forgot that jumping is a mechanic that exists. The second is in the cave after the rolling ball puzzle, and the third one is on this patch that requires you to do a rather tight jump involving a movement mechanic known as a coyote jump, where we're able to jump anywhere after walking off a ledge. With those 3 statues obtained, we now have access to the next 2 worlds by just leaving the level. And so far through World 1 we've got 8 statues and no costumes collected. The next goal of the run is to get 25 Balan statues so that World 4, 5 and 6 are unlocked, giving us more options for ways to avoid costumes. The ordering of this level from this point will get a little bit confusing, but regardless, the next level that we will be visiting will be 3-2. This is a large vertical level with a few large gaps that are actually impossible to cross without a costume. So in 3-2 we will actually be picking up the first costume of this entire run, which is the Dusk Butterfly. And for those who haven't played, the Dusk Butterfly is essentially a costume that allows you to fly during the nighttime, which this level is able to toggle between day and night thanks to these switches littered all over the place. But there's also levels later in the run where Dusk Butterfly can be used again. The ability to fly, albeit at a very slow pace, allows us to complete this level and grab 5 Balan statues along the way. From this point, any Balan statue grab that are worth mentioning will be mentioned. With 3-2 out of the way, we now have 1 costume collected and 13 statues collected. We're going to avoid 3-1 for now, because if we go there, then we'll have to pick up a costume which we don't want to do. The next stop is 2-2, which is a level that contains one of the most broken costumes in the game, the Double Jumper. But I also don't know why I'm bringing this up, because we're not going to be grabbing it. We're coming here to collect the second requirement costume of the run, which is the Dynamic Dolphin. We're using the Dynamic Dolphin for the fact that it can swim, which is needed to ascend high up these waterfalls, where the final one is actually unskippable. To access the Dynamic Dolphin, the game wants you to use the teleporter, but we can go around this wall to get it. We're able to get 5 trophies in this level, one of which requires teleporter to warp through some coral, and the other requires Double Jumper. These both can be skipped by using clever jumps off the coral to get to these areas, and here is a clip of me screwing up the pirate ship jump. So here we can actually get onto the pirate ship, which we need double jumping for, by doing some like pretty awful jump. Get me out of here, get me out of here. Oh my god. Okay, this is a mistake. With that out of the way, we're now leaving 2-2 with 18 trophies and only 2 costumes collected so far. When I first routed this run, I was under the impression that a jumper such as Jumping Jack would be required to beat the game, to get access to certain statues and to do some costume skips, but then my good friend Christian Royal believed that it would be possible to skip Jumping Jack. When testing out levels without the Jumping Jack, I hit a wall with this level. At around the midpoint of the level, there's a section where there's a gap that is just large enough to make a coyote jump just barely impassable. This is because our devilish friend Yuji Naka wanted us to use the Bubble Blower costume to cross this gap. But let's be honest here, if I had to put Bubble Blower on a tier list based on its usefulness, then it wouldn't even be on that list because I just threw it in the trash. At this point, I thought it would be checkmate and that Yuji Naka had had me against a wall, forcing me to use the Bubble Blower. But unfortunately for him, he's dealing with my galaxy brain, and I was able to get across by using the additional floatiness of the Dusk Butterfly, thus explaining why we did 3-2 before World 2. No additional costumes are required during this level, and we can get through collecting 5 more statues, putting our total up to 23. We can even use Dusk Butterfly to just narrowly skip having to open the gate. And now it's time for the World 2 boss. So yes, it's time for the most painful part of this challenge run, which of course will be the boss fights. And don't get me wrong, these bosses are super simple and anyone can actually do them, but the painful part is all the waiting that I need to do. Because I don't want to pick up any additional costumes during this fight, I have to sit through and ignore the phase of the boss where it throws out these electrically charged jellyfish at you. Which would require the jelly jump to deflect back of course, but we don't want to be picking that up. This wouldn't be too bad, but before this attack, we have to sit through the boss sort of doing this slow attack where he throws out these puddles at you. But we can actually abuse a mechanic here, where we can actually switch costumes, and every time you switch costumes, you get about 2 seconds of invulnerability. Basically, you can just spam switching costumes and just tank through everything without taking any damage. Once the boss decides to throw some balls at me, I can jump into them to damage the boss. And then the boss will go into its retaliation phase, which is basically what we refer to the phase that happens after the boss gets damaged. The dynamic Dolphin is suited for the retaliation phase, and then we basically just have to sit through another lot of shadow puddles, followed by jellyfish, followed up by some more balls to then finish off the boss. This will give us 2 statues and put our statue total up to 25, which will then unlock World 4, 5 and 6. But before then, we're going to go back to World 1 and finish off the boss there, because we might as well do it now that we have some costumes. So yeah, once we finish 1-2, we can go on to one boss, and yet again this boss is another waiting game because we don't want to use Tornado Wolf or Pounding Pig here, so we basically have to wait for the boss to become vulnerable after jumping around the arena, and then we have to watch the retaliation phase go through because that's usually required with the Pounding Pig. Then we have to watch the boss shoot some tornadoes to then hit it once more, go through another retaliation phase, and then hit it once the boss is jumping around once more. Unfortunately for us, this boss fight strat only rewards us with 1 statue, taking our total up to 26. But now we can move on to World 4. Now this is an interesting level. You would think that 4-1 would require us to pick up the Soaring Sheep. Not only is the Soaring Sheep a broken costume thanks to a technique where mashing the jump button makes the costume float faster through the air, but you'd think we would need it to get across the fans at the start of the level. This is actually not the case, as we actually have a costume that is able to ride these air currents, and that costume is the Dusk Butterfly. I don't think this is actually intended, as the interaction with these fans are awful. I reckon the fans just lift you if you go into a state where your full speed is slower, which the Dusk Butterfly has by default. Fun fact, the Bubble Blower can also ride these air currents too, but it's still too bad to cross the gap. We will be grabbing our 3rd costume here, which will be the Aero Acrobat. For World 4, this costume will be useful for getting a statue at the end of 4-1, as well as defeating the boss. But you might be thinking that surely I'm freaking stupid or something, and that the Acrobat is not actually required, but trust me here, Acrobat is actually going to be a required costume. Back to what I was saying about the Dusk Butterfly and fan interaction combination. This is definitely something that the QA team left unchecked, because by riding this air current and hitting the jump button a few times, we can get launched up to the end of the level. This is a speedrun technique known as a Dusk Launch, or a Dusk Yeet as I like to call it. We can actually then skip the mini-boss using the Acrobat to snipe a balloon, and then finish off the level with 2 more statues, putting our total up to 28, and a costume count of 3. Moving on to 4-2. Under normal circumstances, we would hit another wall here, as we have no way to break these brittle blocks, and we also don't have a way to go around them. However, we don't even need to worry about this, based on how the level functions. This level involves you getting up to a high platform at the end of the level to get on the back of this giant whale, which houses the crystal thing that ends the level. But funnily enough, the whale starts the level by going underneath the level right by the start. So all we have to do is jump on its back at the start of the level, essentially skipping it all. We can even collect a statue along the way, putting our total up to 29. And now it's time to fight another boss. The World 4 boss can be done very quickly by using Aero Acrobat to coyote jump off the front of the arena to snipe the boss's nose 3 times, being able to collect 3 statues in the process. But I am an idiot, and this went awfully in this run, and I only came out this level with 2, putting the total up to 31. Up next we have 6-2, where I will be grabbing the 4th costume of this entire run. The costume that we will be obtaining will be the Air Cat, and more specifically, we will be grabbing the Air Cat from this secret backstage room. This is because if you collect the outfit from this clothesline, then the cutscene will not play, which normally would play if you were to grab this costume from a crystal. Air Cat will be useful for a few big skips in the upcoming levels due to its floating ability. We can grab 2 statues during this level, and even use a well-timed coyote jump into a float to skip the mini-boss entirely. Our statue total will now be 33. 5-2 contains many sections and puzzles which would involve us having to use Hothead. But I don't want to do that, so we can skip most of this by using Air Cat's float. The first puzzle room can be skipped by floating to this platform with the Balan Belt on it, and then we can go over to the bridge that would come after that room. The final puzzle room doesn't require Hothead, as you can simply get to the back of the cage which hides the switch which opens the door. The final statue is interesting as I can float using Air Cat from the top of the stairs down to the door frame of the final gate. From there, I can then float to a nearby platform and then down to the statue. It was an unorthodox method that I was happy to discover. We can grab 4 statues in this level and put our total up to 37. I held off from doing 3-1 until this point because I wanted to avoid having to use the web wrangler. The first web is easily skippable, but the second web wouldn't be. But with Air Cat, we can bounce off this mushroom, then float to this platform, which is conveniently the end of the level. Along the way, we can easily grab 4 statues, putting our total up to 41, and now it's time for the boss. Free boss is one of the easiest bosses in the game if you're not an idiot like me. You don't need any of the costumes that are given during this fight for a quick kill that also gives 3 statues. Now it's time for 6-1, where we'll be getting our 5th costume of the run, which is going to be Gear Prince. Gear Prince is an extremely versatile and helpful costume, being able to open this one door. But yeah, with what we currently know, this door is unskippable and is the only reason why we need Gear Prince in the first place. Every other puzzle involving this costume is skippable, but this single door is the one exception, and because of this, if I was making a tier list based on costumes, then I would attempt to throw Gear Prince in the trash, purposefully miss, and end up sending it to the Shadow Realm where it belongs. The rest of 6-1 is fairly straightforward though. Just climb the tower using Air Cat, and using the float to skip the last puzzle section. We can grab 4 statues along the way, putting our total up to 48. Now it's time for the World 6 boss, which is one of the easiest bosses in the run. We unfortunately have to wait out the jumping phase as we don't want to pick up the Pumpkin Puncher. Once that phase is over, the boss will summon some fists, which we can jump into to damage the boss. The retaliation phase doesn't require the Chrono Bunny, as you can get out of this frozen effect early by frantically wiggling your analog stick. After one more jumping phase into the fists, the boss will be defeated and we will have 50 statues, unlocking World 7, 8 and 9. And just in case you need a recap, we've only collected 5 costumes so far. We're now going to go to 8-1 next to collect our 6th and probably most important costume of the entire run, known as the Frost Fairy. Essentially, for those who don't know, the Frost Fairy is the Air Cat, but its float gains height as you move around. This makes Frost Fairy the most versatile costume in the entire game. There is a technique with this costume where mashing the jump button will allow you to travel far distances in the air, which we will be using a lot. We can get Frost Fairy using some clever jumps off these rocks using Air Cat. Once Frost Fairy is unlocked, we can quickly get our hands on 5 statues. We can use iframes to go through the spikes, which holds 1 statue. We can mash across this gap to grab this statue, and we can even skip the mini-boss by getting on top of this switch, then doing a small mash over to this platform. After the mini-boss skip, we can grab this quick statue, giving us 6 in total. Our statue count after 8-1 is 56, and our costume count is now at 6. We can easily do 5-1 using exclusively Frost Fairy whilst getting 5 statues. The statue that requires a Lickshot Lizard can be accessed easily by using Frost Fairy, and we can even skip the mini-boss by getting on top of this steel box after the statue by the seesaws. From here, we can do some pirouettes to get onto this bit of ground geometry on this wall, and then from there, we can walk on the air over to this window, and finally over to this hidden trophy which can get us directly to the end of the level. Whilst there was nothing actually stopping us from doing 5-1 earlier, Doing 5-1 with Frost Fairy allowed us to get a couple extra statues and even get an extra from the boss. During the egg phase, we would normally have to use a Lick Shot Lizard to hit the boss, but luckily for us, we can use Frost Fairy to fly directly into the boss's weak spot, allowing us to get a free hit without needing an additional costume. We have to ignore the retaliation phase as we don't want to pick up the Guardian Bird. We can wait around during the egg phase for the boss to attack us with the bird box to get an additional hit in. After another retaliation phase, we can repeat the first hit and end the boss with 2 statues and no additional costumes, putting our statue total up to 63. We will now go back to finish off World 8. We can skip the majority at 8-2 by turning around at the start of the level and then jumping off from where we get the first statue all the way down to the slide. From the top of the slide we can grab one statue, we can then grab another from the middle of the slide, and we can grab one at the bottom of the slide. And that's basically it for 8-2. It's a fairly simple level, and now let's do the boss. This boss is actually painfully slow. We have no way to damage the icy core unless we pick up a hardy hammer, which I have no intent on doing. So we have to kind of wait out the slow phases involving the rotating spikes followed up by some shadow puddles. Once the boss throws some ice at us, we're actually able to hit it. Normally the retaliation phase you would need to pick up an abominable snowman to avoid being frozen, but we can prevent that by just switching costumes before the freezing occurs. We can then fly up to the heart with the Frost Fairy, and after waiting around for more rotating spikes and shadow puddles, the boss will then throw more ice which we can use to end the fight. With the boss defeated, we have gained no additional costumes and 2 statues, putting our total up to the funny number. 9-1 is actually my favourite level from this challenge. We can skip using the Iron Panda in the starting section by flying over the wall with the Frost Fairy. As for the Rail Runner, we actually don't need that either, as there are these small platforms spaced out where the track would be that we can fly over to using the Frost Fairy, skipping the need for Rail Runner. In the second section, we can ride this air current with Dusk Butterfly to perform another launch over to this platform behind us. Using the Frost Fairy, we can then get to the secret area to get a statue, and then back to where the second set of tracks would be. Luckily for us, we can do what we did before and land on the small platform to skip the need for the costume. We can even grab the statue that is on the tracks too. From the tunnel, we can then turn to the right and fly over to the end of the level, but before that, we can fly down to this little section to get another statue and then fly back up with the Dusk Butterfly. This run almost died here because I almost walked straight into the clown costume, which is not one of the required costumes for this run. I was able to complete 9-1 by collecting 5 statues and skipping 2 costumes that would be needed to complete this level intentionally. 9-2 requires no additional costumes but has some cool skips. We can get onto this balcony with Dusk Butterfly and then use Frost Fairy to fly over to the statue. We can then avoid using the ghost for this statue by using, you guessed it, Frost Fairy. And then we can also skip the mini-boss by flying out this window and onto the platform with the Tim statue. From here, we can go around the outside of the mansion to get to the end of the level. In total for this level, we've collected 3 statues and now it's time for the boss. This boss requires a bit of waiting but isn't too bad. We can't deal damage during the first phase as we don't want to use Pounding Robot, so we have to wait for the missile phase, which requires us to simply jump into one of the missiles to damage the boss. The retaliation phase is cool, as it would normally require the Slow Tortoise. However, it was recently discovered that if you use iframes to sit inside the cage that the boss uses to protect itself, then we can jump into the belly button when it becomes exposed, skipping the need for Slow Tortoise. After waiting around for the missile phase again, the boss is defeated, giving us 2 statues and allowing us to leave World 9 with a total of 79 statues. With World 9 out of the way, I then moved on to World 7, starting with 7-1. 7-1 is a fairly simple level in this challenge as we can use Frost Fairy to get out to these moving platforms, which more or less skips the entire level. We can grab 4 easy statues here and move on to 7-2. 7-2 is one of the scariest levels in the run, and not because of the mistake that you're about to see on screen, like honestly, what hit me here? So this level is difficult because I refused to pick up the floaty flower, which is normally required to go through the giant door. But it's possible to do it without floaty flower, and it requires some very well spaced out light presses of the jump button with the Frost Fairy to get onto this platform beneath the door. From here you can pirouette to go through the door, but before you go through that door you need to land on the door frame so that you can refresh your jump, otherwise you will die the moment you go through the door. If you perform this jump, then you can make it to the other side of the door and land on safe ground. From here we can then get a couple more trophies and skip the mini-boss using Frost Fairy to get on the wall. With no additional costume pickups, we can get 5 statues in this level, and with 7-2 out of the way, it's time for the boss. The only attack that 7 boss has that we can't deal with is the retaliation phase, because we need a costume that can break metal, which we don't have. When the boss slams down his hands on the arena, we can use Frost Fairy to glide to the boss to get a quick hit in, and we can also jump into missiles when it decides to work. With 7 boss done, we now have a total of 90 statues. 10-1 is a nice straightforward level for me, as it's essentially the same as in the any% speedrun. We do have to pick up the Inky Blaster though, as these doors block progression, and this costume is required to open those doors. This puts our costume total up to 7. Inky Blaster is a good costume though, so I'm not mad about picking it up. Other than that, this level consists of flying around with Frost Fairy and opening doors with Inky Blaster. We can grab 6 statues in this level without losing too much time, putting our statue total up to 96. Because we have Inky Blaster, I am going to hold off from doing 10-2 to make full use of this costume. 12-1 is a fairly straightforward level with no actual costume requirements to beat it, so I can just run through with Frost Fairy and use Inky Blasters to defeat enemies that are blocking progression. Along the way, I grab 3 statues, taking the total up to 99. 11-2 is a level where Dusk, Butterfly and Inky Blaster get to shine. We can use Dusk Butterfly to fly straight up to the mini-boss from the start of the level, and then use Inky Blasters to snipe the mini-boss from safe ground. With the mini-boss defeated, we can grab 4 statues on the way back down using the Frost Fairy to take our statue total up to 103. Frost Fairy absolutely destroys 10-2. By following this pathway, we can grab 2 quick statues and then use a good mash to land on this platform, which holds a mirror that conveniently skips the level. The mini-boss is also skippable by using Frost Fairy to go around the gate, and with that we can then move on to 10 boss. The World 10 boss is one of the only bosses that I can actually do normally. For the first phase, just snipe a bucket with the Inky Blaster to damage the boss. For the retaliation phase, we can get a quick hit in by using a combination of iframes and aggressive running to get behind the paintings, and then snipe the boss's weak spot. For the final phase, we can use Frost Fairy to avoid the rabbit things and bulk the boss to finish it off, giving us 3 statues and taking our statue total up to 108. As World 11 technically counts as a nighttime world, we can use Dusk Butterfly to fly, and we can do this from the start of the level to access the end of the level, finishing it in about 10 seconds and allowing us to fight the boss. Now it may not seem like it, but Water Blaster is a required costume, so we will be picking it up during the World 11 boss to snipe the valves to get 2 hits in. For the retaliation phase, we can pirouette with the Frost Fairy as the boss starts to roar to immediately hit it. This does not reward a statue, but it is fast. Getting the valve hits twice allows us to get 1 statue, which takes the total up to 109, and our costume total is now at 8. All we have to do for 12-2 is to run through it with Frost Fairy. As we only need 1 more statue, I don't need to pick it up here, as the boss will reward me with at least 1. There's nothing exciting about this level honestly, so let's move on to 12 boss. Okay, and now it's time for the slowest boss in the game. One method to hit the boss requires you to use Vacuum Blasters to spit up a bomb into the boss's mouth. The retaliation phase requires Jelly Jolt, which I don't have, and the only way we can actually hit the boss is to wait for the boss to suck up part of the stage after the bombs phase so that we can shoot this pylon. After each of these attacks, we then have to watch a slow retaliation phase and then the bomb phases again, so this boss takes a while. But once it's defeated, we will have a statue total of 110, which will unlock the final boss. And just to recap, we have collected 8 costumes so far, and these costumes are Dusk Butterfly, Dynamic Dolphin, Aero Acrobat, Air Cat, Gear Prince, Frost Fairy, Inky Blaster, and Water Blaster. The Lance fight is fairly easy. I use Acrobat and Frost Fairy to attack Lance during the Shadow Clones phase, and I use Inky Painter to snipe Lance when he jumps down to his weird tentacle. Once Lance is defeated, we can move on to the final boss, and this is where the entire run comes together. After this boss wipes you out, you will be visited by the people who you have saved, who will give you costumes to help beat the boss. The first 3 costumes that are given to you are Air Cat, Acrobat, and Dusk Butterfly. 3 costumes that won't go towards the costume total because we have already used them. After hitting the boss with this set of costumes, we will then be given 3 more costumes. These costumes are the Water Blaster, the Invisible Man, and the Quad Cannon. As we have already picked up the Water Blaster, this will take our costume total to 10. After hitting the boss during this phase, you will be then given 3 more costumes. The Inky Blaster, the Frost Fairy, and the Dynamic Dolphin. 3 costumes that we already have. After landing this hit, the boss goes into its final phase, which we can then shortly finish it off once it finishes its attack. We can then deliver 1 final blow with the Frost Fairy and finish the run. So, the answer to what's the least amount of costumes required to beat Balan Wonderworld is 10 costumes. From the start, I was aware of the 9 costumes that we were going to be forced to use. So, this challenge basically became, how can I use these 9 costumes to beat the game? The only costume that we had to pick up that was not featured in this boss fight was Gear Prince, so I hope he's enjoying his time down in the Shadow Realm because he's not leaving. If we can find a way to skip Gear Prince, then this will take our true minimum amount of costumes down to 9, as I see no conceivable way to skip a phase during the final boss. Overall, this challenge was fun to route, and I can see this being an interesting speedrun if someone wants to spend the time to optimize the route. If you want to watch me do a 10 costume run, then it will be linked in the description. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider subscribing to the YouTube. leaving a like and leaving a comment to let me know how you found the video. That would mean a lot. If you haven't followed the Twitch already. And yeah, that's about it really. But before I go, I just want to thank anyone who's actually got this far in the video. You've had to put up my voice for about 25 minutes, and personally, I'm probably being a harsh critic on myself, but I do not enjoy listening to my voice, and I'm not good at speaking, and it's something I want to get better at. But maybe in the future, maybe as I make more videos, then maybe something like this you can see more often, and maybe something I'll get better at. So, I mean, I bubbled those words up, but who cares? I'll leave you here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. I'm about to say goodbye. See ya.